Welcome back to the Speaking and Communicating Podcast. I am your host, Roberta Ndlela. If you are looking to improve your communication skills, both professionally and personally, this is the podcast you should be tuning into. Communication and soft skills are crucial for your career growth and leadership development. And by the end of this episode, please log on to Apple and Spotify and leave us a rating and a review. Now let's get communicating with our guest today, joining us from Jersey. Maren Perry is the founder and CEO of Arden Coaching. She specializes in the human side of leadership and is here to help us navigate difficult conversations. And before I go any further, please welcome her to the show. Hi, Maren.
Hi, Roberta. Thank you so much for having me.
My absolute pleasure. Welcome to the show. Of all the things you decided you wanted to address, what is it about difficult conversations that you found so appealing?
Oh gosh, so we work with large organizations throughout the US and around the world. And if I could give them one gift, if I could wrap it in a box and just hand an organization a gift, most consistently, I would give them the ability to have difficult conversations better. Because I find that most organizations are pretty bad at this. Because most people are bad at it. And so, we are the organizations, and most people don't want to have difficult conversations. That's why they're called difficult. And so people shy away from them. And I think it has a huge impact throughout the organization, not only in one-on-one relationships, but really throughout the whole organization.
And why is that? Is it just us being human?
Well, yeah, we don't like being uncomfortable. Difficult conversations are uncomfortable. If I have to tell someone something that I suspect they won't like, I shy away from it. I find mostly people are, well, two things. They're worried about hurting someone's feelings, right? They're worried about how that person is going to take the information, but they also don't want to have to deliver it, right? They don't want
Yes.
to be the person to have that
Get
conversation.
someone
So
else to do it.
right. I mean, the thing is, what is so ironic is that most workers, most employees, all the way up through very senior levels, they are craving feedback and they want to know how they can do better. They don't want you sitting on information that they would find useful. They don't want you secretly thinking they're doing a terrible job or not telling you that you're inappropriately dressed or that you should speak differently in meetings, right? People want that information. They don't want to secretly like find out that you've been holding something back. And yet, when it comes to having those conversations, most of us shy away from it because we're hesitant that we're going to damage the relationship or hurt someone's feelings.
Yes, especially as grown-ups, we always think, you know what? Just give me all the cards I'm being dealt so that I can make an informed decision. So when you find out that Maren actually held some information back that could have been useful, yes, that is very triggering.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to know in like my exit interview that actually you think I wasn't doing a great job, even though you wrote exceeds expectations on all of my performance reviews, right? We definitely have that happen with some clients where the culture is such that I'm supposed to praise you and tell you that you're doing a great job. And so I put, generally not even meets expectations, but exceeds expectations consistently on your review. And yet you're not getting promoted and you don't understand why not, right? Because every bit of evidence that you have says, I'm doing great, right?
Very
Uh,
confusing. Yeah.
Super confusing. And I don't, nobody wants to be in that position. And yet th- nobody wants to deliver tough news or what could be considered, constructive feedback. Uh, and so I think it's ironic that we all crave it and yet we don't want to offer it.
Mm. Now let's look at leadership for a second when it comes to handling difficult conversations. One of the things that we address is, first of all, leaders, when they're promoted, they're not equipped with communication skills in general.
Agreed.
And then you add the layer of conflict resolution. Then you add the layer of difficult conversations. So how do they get to that level when even just basic informing your team, showing them what the vision is, because they even struggle with that.
Yes. Yes. Well, I think that what you've uncovered is a systemic challenge because often people are promoted because they're really good at a subject matter expertise, right? You're a great accountant and you get promoted to lead other accountants. You're a great marketer, you get promoted to lead other marketers. That doesn't mean you're a great leader. It means you're a great marketer, right? So I think that how we promote people is a challenge because they do get to leadership roles and then they're responsible for all these people. And that's a totally different set of skills than what got them there. You know, if they're a great marketer or accountant or whatever their expertise is, they get promoted to a place where to be successful as a leader and lead your team requires different skills than perhaps why you were promoted because you were the best creative on the team or the best accountant on the team. So I think the promotion process is a bit of a problem there to start. But you have to practice, you have to study, you have to be curious and try to learn how to do it better to answer your question of, you know, how do they get better at it? You got to practice like everybody else and everything else. You have to develop a skill. We actually talk about, and we can go here if you want, but we actually talk about the 5 C's of having difficult conversations and what you need to think about when you go into those conversations. Some of it is a skill. You can actually practice it.
Mm.
And then some of it is a mindset where, you know, you have to be willing. So
That's right. Because here's the thing about that. Speaking of being a subject matter expert, and then you say, okay, you promoted now to look after the other accountants because you are the.
yeah.
Isn't one of the things that happens if you're an expert is that sometimes you get handed a project that you oversee, or sometimes you have clients who say, I will only give you guys this project if Maren is the one handling
That's
it
right.
because, you know, and then you have this responsibility of dealing one-on-one with the client rather than your boss. So are there any skills, even while you are in that individual contributor position, that you can then add to and take with to the next level if you do get promoted to a leadership position?
Because people still want to work with you. You mean they want to work with you
Yes.
directly? Yeah, I mean, that's partially about being willing to have the difficult conversation with the client, perhaps, right? You know, I'm an executive coach myself, but I don't do any of the delivery anymore. And even last week, I had a previous client who said, I have a friend and I'd really like you to take them on personally, right? I have to have a conversation with him about how my team is way better suited at this point to take on that high level client. So my challenge is as the previous individual contributor, right? 15 years ago, I was doing that coaching myself. I now have to have that conversation with the client and empower my team and delegate to my team so that someone else has the opportunity to take that on. It's not always easy, right? People want to work with the person they're familiar with or the person who did it
Yes.
last time, right? But if you can assure them that you will have oversight and that, you know, you are monitoring what the team is doing, there's a chance that you can hand that off effectively. But that's challenging, you're
Yes,
right.
it is, especially if the client has had a long-term relationship with the organization. They tend to start having recommendations and, you know, expressing how they would like to see things being done going forward and who they would like to work with.
Yes. Yes. And I mean, every company is going to have to navigate that in their own way. I know plenty of organizations who just put their most senior person on that engagement, right? They just accommodate the client. That's what they want on that engagement. That's who they get. And sometimes that is completely the thing to do, you know, as a consultant or as an outside eye. Um, but I think that that can be a challenge when you've been an individual contributor. And as you say, you move into that more senior role.
Hmm. So now let's talk about the conversations. You gave examples of, I don't want to find out at my exit interview that I was, dressing inappropriately or
Right.
I I used, bad language or inappropriate behavior and things like that. When it happens, so let's say before the interview, the exit interview, and you're still part of the company. If something happens, what is the best way to approach the situation for them to bring it to your attention?
You mean how do I ask for it, or if something happens that I want to bring up
If,
to someone?
yeah, so I dress inappropriately and you want to
Hmm.
bring that to my attention. How do you approach the conversation in a strategic way so that, like you said, sometimes you're afraid to hurt my feelings and whatnot
Yeah.
and offend me. People get offended a lot while addressing the issue and making sure that I also, don't feel demoralized because then it
Yeah.
might even affect my productivity.
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, coming from the right place is very helpful. Check yourself as to why you're bringing up the topic, right? Is this something that will serve someone? Is it something that will support them and help them? That is certainly the foundation of having the difficult conversation. If you're just trying to embarrass someone, it's not a difficult conversation, right? The difficulty comes when you don't want to offend them. You want them to be productive. So I think checking yourself that way. I think it requires on your part who's going to be broaching this, or sorry, you're the one who's dressing inappropriately. So on my part, it requires some courage. I have to be willing to be uncomfortable, right?
Mm.
Let's say I'm your boss. I have to be willing to be uncomfortable in that conversation. But you know what? That's my job. That's where I have to, put my big girl panties on and make sure I have the conversation that not everybody would want to have. Um, I think that you want to do it in an appropriate time, right? If someone is particularly upset or having a tough day, probably, your emotional intelligence will tell you that's probably not the time to broach the conversation. And then all the things that you probably already know, you don't want to do it in public, right? You want to have a private conversation with someone. Um, but I think mostly you want to make sure you're speaking to them from their side of the table. We talk about that as the C, the one of the five C's is being collaborative, right? So that you are on the same side of the table as they are, so that you're not confronting them like across the table, but you're
Mm.
essentially with them and saying, hey, I noticed something, and you want to get their buy-in. I noticed something the other day that made me think it was something that you'd want to know about. Is it okay if I share that with you? And if you're genuinely trying to help them and you have that tone of voice, I don't know many people are going to say, you know what? No, I don't want that. You
Okay.
notice something I might want to hear? No, I don't want to know about it. Right? So you've gotten their buy-in. You want to make sure you have their permission to share. And then you want to give them the feedback. And this is where I think you need to be clear. That's another one of the C's. You want to be clear and not hedge your bets and not use, super hesitant language or be too tentative. You want to be clear, kind, but clear to say, hey, I noticed that what you were wearing the other day seemed really unusual. It was surprising to me that you would wear that cropped top to our board meeting, right? And then it gives the other person a chance to say, "Oh my goodness, I spilled coffee all over myself right before I took that I was so embarrassed. I didn't have anything else to do." Right? You give them the opportunity to actually share their side of it. Because you're coming from assuming positive intent and
Mm.
giving them the chance to share their side of that story rather than just come and say, you know what you wore the other day was really inappropriate, right? That is a much more assertive and aggressive, could be seen as aggressive on the other side, as opposed to easing into it and giving them a chance to contribute.
Right. So the first example is, please help me understand, whereas the other one is, who was a crop top to a boardroom? What were you thinking? Exactly.
Yeah, and with your girlfriends, that may be a totally appropriate thing to say, right? But if you're the boss and you're coming to the
Right.
conversation,
Mm.
you want to leave a little bit more space for someone. Um, and I think there's a balance between leaving space to be wrong, right? I want to leave space for someone to say, I spilled coffee all over myself and I was super embarrassed. I never want to do that again,
Hmm.
Um, leaving space for that and to learn and understand where they're coming from. There's a balance between that kind of some of the literature talks about talking tentatively, right? That's what that's talking about. It's like leaving space for the other person and leaving space for my assumptions to be wrong. uh, on the other hand, you don't want to talk so tentatively that someone leaves the conversation not knowing what the heck just happened and what you were trying to tell them, right? I think that's where being courageous comes in, and you have to be able at some point to say, I'm concerned that some people might have taken that as being dressed inappropriately, right? As opposed to your example of like, what were you thinking wearing that? And
You
right,
know better, Maren.
right,
Drop
you
off
know
to
better
the
than
foot.
that. And this is where you have to take the relationship into account because you may be able to say that to some people, and that for them is a way to feel connected to you. You may be able to say that to some people, maybe not so much at work, but you have to take the relationship into account too. If you know someone is easily upset or very concerned about, in this case, their appearance, you want to be sensitive to that as opposed to someone that you have a very jovial, joking relationship with. And,
Right.
you might be able to say something closer to, oh my goodness, that top, what were you thinking? Right.
This is why they say leadership is hard because in this example alone, you see that this wasn't addressed the moment that it was happening. This person, we just say, we just assume that they actually sat in the meeting dressed inappropriately. Because as a leader, don't you think that you, just as they walk in with a crop top, so you don't say something at all at that moment to display some form of emotional intelligence. You
Oh,
wait
sure,
to
you
speak to them
absolutely
in
can.
pride or in private to say, "Can I talk to you for a second after the meeting?" You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because I think there's so many nuances to this, and that's why a lot of leaders would be, excited that I got promoted, I'm getting all the perks and the car allowances, etc. But then when they say, you know what, this dealing with people part is the hardest.
that's right. That's right. The numbers of the marketing becomes the easiest piece, I think. Um,
Hmm.
but you're right. In the example I gave, that was pretty extreme. You probably wouldn't let someone walk in with a crop top into a board meeting, but in terms of
Hmm.
like addressing something maybe a little more subtle, you might be able to wait and do it later. But yeah, I think you're right that the social awareness and the understanding of what the consequences are in the moment. Like, is it worse for me to take that person out in the hall and lose that entire presentation? Or possibly embarrass them? Do I have a substitute outfit for that? Like, what can I do right now to solve this problem?
Hmm.
Um, versus uh, the consequence of waiting till later, right? You're always balancing those things, I think, as a leader. And it does take a nuanced understanding because in that situation alone, you're talking about understanding the consequence with the board, understanding the consequence to the company, understanding the consequence to the individual, and understanding the consequence to you as someone who is, maybe vouched for this person to give a presentation, right? You are balancing an incredible number of potential consequences, and they're not even certain, right? You don't
Hmm.
know what the consequence would be. You have suspicions and assumptions and, right, practical guesses, but you don't really know. So you're trying to balance all of that uncertainty in any moment. And this is a ridiculous example of someone walking into a board meeting with a crop top, right?
Right.
As opposed to something where you still have all of that uncertainty in decisions that leaders are making every day about something that may be way more consequential than that, right? And they
Hmm.
are still balancing all of that nuance, all of those consequences, and trying to prioritize what is the critical thing for me to make a decision on in this moment. What decision will I make on that with all the possible outcomes of all those uncertain nuances?
Yes. And now let's talk about two actual things that have happened in the last few years and how leaders could have addressed those difficult conversations. The first one is the layoffs that came from COVID. You've had a
Mm.
team that's been loyal and they would go the extra mile for you, and suddenly you have to address them and announce the fact that there's been changes and some people will be let go. And then the second one is, which has been happening in the last year or two, where leaders are saying, okay, now you guys are so used to working from home, you're going to have to come back.
Oh gosh, we have so many clients who have done both those things, and they are not easy.
Mm.
I think layoffs are the hardest, personally. I think that leaders relate to that as a failure often, that they have failed or that the company has failed because they cannot keep these people. And this is a little bit different than just like, we merged and someone is brutally cutting people they don't know, right? I'm talking about your example with COVID where people have been loyal and, this is a matter of saving the company
Mm-hmm.
or saving those jobs. And it's a terrible situation for people to find themselves in. I will guarantee you, no one sits on the leader side of that conversation with joy. But it is a necessary consequence, right? If you're going to save the company, that's the difficult conversation that has to happen. HR will give you 17 different things that you're supposed to say. But the thing that I have found most useful for our clients is when they understand that this is a turning point for this person, but it is not necessarily a terrible turning point for this person, that you don't know what the future is for that person who you're laying off. And that many of those people will find something that they enjoy more, that is a better fit, that, sends them in a new direction, sends them back to school. That if you assume that it's a terrible thing that they're being laid off, and no one wants to have that conversation, but if you assume the result of the conversation, it's harder for you to have it. And that the truth is, we don't actually know. It could be a great thing for that person. And I'm not trying to be Pollyanna about it. I'm just trying to be
Mm.
open to the possibility that maybe not in this moment, in this particular conversation, but 3 days or 3 months or 3 years from now, they're going to relate to it like the best thing that happened to them.
Yes, when something is currently happening, I always say, even to my mom, because she tries to make us feel better as a mom. I say, Ma, I don't need the idealistics right now. I just want to sit in this pain and feel it.
Yes, absolutely. I'm not
Sometimes.
suggesting that you should tell them that.
All right. Yes. Yes.
Right? I'm not
Yeah,
suggesting that
because
you should
there's,
say, you
but I
know,
understand what you're saying. Yes, because if you approach it with a bit of a more positive outlook, even the way you deliver the message that people are being laid off will be a very different tone versus, you know what, economy is bad. You all just need to go. Yes, yeah, I fully am on board with you. Yes.
yeah, I mean, it's not an easy conversation, but I think that in terms of preparing oneself for those conversations, you just have to let go of that assumption that it's a total
Mm-hmm.
disaster.
Right. Now, these CEOs that want their team back
Yes.
to the office, when people are saying, I'm so glad I don't have to be stuck in traffic anymore. I'm more productive at home and all of those
Yeah.
things. How do they then convince their team members to come back? And is there a valid, significant reason that they can present to their team to say, hey, listen, yes, you guys were productive at home, but now that the pandemic's over, you need to come back. And when they say why, how does how do they respond to that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and plenty of leaders are facing that now. And we like over the last year or so, in particular, we've seen more and more companies requiring people to come back to work. And there's not a one size fits all answer because every company culture is different. I think
Mm-hmm.
that the culture is really what many people are speaking to. I mean, there are arguments on an efficiency side and a productivity side. Even when people feel like they're more productive at home, there's a collaboration and innovation that happens when people, you know, run across one another from different projects in a way that you don't do when you're, this way virtually, right? I don't
Yes.
casually run across someone from a different department and strike up a conversation in a relationship. So those things don't happen virtually. And you're talking about creating a company culture that is that ethos of what it is to work somewhere. And many times I think that that's what the leaders are looking for. They're looking for that culture that, yes, has impact on productivity and has impact on relationships and collaboration and many things that you could write on a spreadsheet. You could actually track those things. But in terms of the conversation about it, I think you have to enroll people in the idea of why it's important, because they are going to give something up. They are going to have that commute. They are going to have, less time with their kids, right? You have to enroll them in what is important about it for them, in addition to for the company, because,
Mm.
we're all looking for what's in it for us, right?
Yeah,
Ultimately. Now,
true.
for some of us, that is the mission of the company, right? There are plenty of people we work with who are so tied to their company because they believe in the mission and they love what their company does. Those people might say, oh, it's better for the company, I'm in. But for the most part, you're really talking to people through their own lens, through their own filter of what they want for themselves in their life, right? So you're going to have to get them excited about and motivated by what's in it for them, including the collaboration with their team or the perks of being in the office and in person. And you won't get everybody. I mean, that's the tough truth. You won't get everybody back. Some people will leave.
Despite the pizza party. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely not the pizza party. That's not really the way to go. I don't think, we've seen clients with like beer in the kitchen. I don't advise that one. That didn't work out well.
Oh, that's
But,
not.
beer on tap in the kitchen, Friday afternoon parties, different ways of job sharing and, nicer offices, like all kinds of quote unquote perks to bring people back. But,
Mm.
honestly, we've seen a lot of people enjoy coming back. Maybe not 5 days a week, like they enjoy, but they want the connection.
Mm.
If you are an extrovert, maybe working at home has not been so great for you.
So it depends on, because introverts, they say, this is the best thing that's ever happened in my life,
Right.
and I still get to work.
Yes. Yes.
So
And that
it,
is a challenge, right? The
mm,
organization wants a variety of different people. And so, how do you balance the introverts who would just rather work at home all the time and they can't believe that that wasn't an option for the last 30 years, right? Like they
and
really
they are
are
super
very thrilled.
productive when at home because they don't have to deal with people.
Yeah, exactly. And certain roles, right? Like we have clients who have these huge open spaces, like 10 to 5 years ago, it's like all open concept and all these open spaces. And they have a job where they have to, have confidential conversations. And there aren't enough like conference rooms and things like that to have a confidential conversation. One organization we worked with, all the conference rooms were completely glass. So you were in this open concept, and then even when you were collaborating, you were in a glass box
Everybody can see.
in the middle of all these other desks. And so there was like no private space to have that confidential conversation. It was confidential because no one could hear you, but everybody could see you,
But they know who it's Roberta talking to Maren.
Right, right.
About
Roberta's the one
something.
who fires people, and Maren's in there with her. Like, I feel bad for Maren now, right? It was just,
Right.
yeah. So that may be the least effective layout, but I do think that you won't please everybody with your solution, right?
Mm.
Some people didn't like going home. Some people were resentful when they had to stay at work and were essential, and other people got to go home. So the the most common compromise I've seen is the 3 days a week in the middle of the week in person
Yes.
and Monday and Friday at home.
Yes, and some do alternates like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then Tuesday, Thursday, things like that. Yes, they're trying to find
Yeah.
this balance, this compromise, as you said. So you help leaders develop their capacity. When it comes to difficult conversations, what would be your last words of wisdom for them to equip themselves so that if something needs to be addressed, they have a strategic way of addressing it?
Yeah, so we talked about practice and learning the skills. Courage. I think courage is the biggest thing because it's your job. That actually is the job of a leader is to be the one who has those difficult conversations. Think of any leader you admire. Can you imagine them shying away from having a difficult conversation? Probably not,
Nope.
right? So that's where we have to recognize that in that moment, our job is to be uncomfortable. And it's okay. Like you'll get through the conversation, you will live, the other person will live, and you can have confidence that you can clean things up. You can clean that up if you make a mess. But the courage to have the conversation and not shy away from it, I think makes the biggest difference in an organization.
Mm-hmm. And what you said earlier regarding building relationship, I'm not saying, be best buddies, but if a leader every now and again has
Mm,
one-on-ones with their team members and gets to understand them, they will know how to approach any subject, any difficult conversation.
for sure. That's a whole topic for another day.
And you
Yeah.
will come back and
That,
talk about it for sure.
yeah. The rapport building, I think you're right that the sensitivity of how you approach things differently with different people is a core leadership skill for sure. Uh, yeah, we'll talk about it on another day.
And you are most invited to come back, Maren. Thank you so much, Maren Perry, founder and CEO of Arden Coaching, who's been helping us navigate difficult conversations. I believe there's something special on your website that you have for us.
Yes, so I have something for you. So, difficult conversations is one of our Arden 8, which is the 8 leadership dimensions that our programs are based around and that we say are essential to all leaders. And so, I want to offer your listeners an opportunity to get a white paper that outlines all of those Arden 8. This is one of them, but they can get all of them. So, if they go to ardencoaching.com/Arden8, so Arden is ARDEN. So ardencoaching.com/Arden8, the number 8. There's a white paper there that will elaborate on these topics.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that gift, Maren. ardencoaching.com/Arden8, the number 8, so that we get those free downloadables.
That's right. Free download. Everyone loves a free download.
Yes, we appreciate it. Everybody loves freebies. Thank you, Maren. But most
Thank you so much.
importantly, my pleasure. Thank you for being here today. I really enjoyed having this conversation with you.
Me too. Thank you so much for all your work.
My absolute pleasure. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify, and stay tuned for more episodes to come.